The very agency that is supposed to protect Americans is now targeting them. Welcome to Freedom Alive. The FBI has become a weaponized arm of the government, and without vital reform, America will witness this agency continue to target innocent Americans and trample our constitutional rights. Steve Friend was a special agent for the FBI for 8.5 years. Then he became a whistleblower and began to speak out about the injustice that is happening inside the agency. Steve was suspended without pay and has firsthand experience to share with us today. But first, our Freedom Alert is next. Appeals Court rebukes the Biden administration for censoring millions of Americans. The Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals ruled that the Biden administration coerced social media companies to censor posts about topics such as election fraud, COVID-19, the COVID shots, lockdowns, and the Hunter Biden laptop story. The court noted the impact of this case on Americans' free speech. They reiterated that they believe the lower court previously ruled correctly against the Biden administration. The court now restricts the White House, the Surgeon General, the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, and the FBI from improperly influencing social media content policies while the case continues in litigation. The Biden administration has violated our most fundamental liberty of free speech. Their attempts to control social media is a totalitarian power grab that tramples the Constitution. This lawlessness must be stopped. I want to welcome a very special guest, Steve Friend, and he is a former FBI agent, former SWAT, and now a whistleblower. Welcome to Freedom Alive, Steve.
Thank you, Reg, for having me.
Steve, you wrote a book called True Blue, and we'll talk about this more as we talk about your experience. It's called True Blue, and the subtitle is My Journey from Beat Cop to Suspended FBI Whistleblower. We did another program with you, so I don't want to cover everything that we went through before, but I do want to go over a couple of things. You were with the FBI for about 8.5 years, 5 years of which you were on the SWAT team. And before that, you were a beat cop. So you've been about 12 years in law enforcement, 8.5 years or so with the FBI, 5 years of which was the SWAT team. And your last assignment was in Daytona, and you were part of the SWAT team in this area of Florida and working with the FBI in other areas. But you were also assigned to some very interesting investigations. And I want to talk about those. January 6th was one of the investigations you were assigned to. You were assigned to go to school boards to hear what was going on. We'll talk a little bit about that. And you also were assigned to the Governor Whitmer situation. We'll talk about that because your information that you have put forth as a whistleblower is startling. But before we do that, I want to cover the issue of how people receive bonuses within the FBI, because to me, that is very disturbing. Tell us how that happens.
It is called integrated program management. It's a quota system that's established and negotiated between the field and headquarters every year, where they set metrics for themselves to achieve. And it's the number of arrests they have to have, indictments, intelligence reports, actual case openings in every matter of particular type of violation. And by checking the box on all those metrics throughout the year, the senior executives within all the field offices are able to get bonuses between $30,000 and $50,000.
So opening a case is one of the metrics, and then arresting a person after you've opened the case is another metric, and then indicting that person after the person has been arrested is another metric?
The indictment would come first typically, but yes, those are all different statistical accomplishments. And there's one that even the FBI has invented, which is called a disruption, which typically is for an organization. If you arrest a person, you've disrupted their activities. Take that to...
So you get a bonus for that. So you not only get a bonus for that arrest, but disrupting something bigger than that person, supposedly.
Yes, and that's one of the stats that we see that's always thrown out there because it's not really defined.
So that means that if you get a bonus for arresting person A, it is to the FBI's advantage, who are involved in that arrest, to try to connect that person with some other organization or movement, because if they do, that's another metric that they can check off the box.
Yes, there's always pressure to develop an organization. And then the other thing about a disruption is you can only get one per day. So I've been in situations where I was told to arrest somebody on Monday, a different person on Tuesday, because then we have 2 disruptions for those separate days as opposed to arresting them on the same day.
And they might be with the same so-called entity or organization.
Yes.
2 different people, but you don't want to arrest them both back to back. You want to arrest them on subsequent days so that you can get your bonus metrics on both days.
Correct.
And then there's also a bonus for the kinds of technology or tools you use in your investigation. What's that about?
Again, it's any sort of investigative tool that you would have. Obviously, the coup de grace one is the T3, which is the wiretap. And that is the most sophisticated, invasive technique that you get. You have to exhaust all other tools in order to use it. And getting it is very cumbersome. And it's always a issue every year that the division has to have a certain number of wiretaps. So we need to push this to the next level so that we can do that.
So what's the estimate in terms of how many metrics are measured for these annual bonuses?
I couldn't even begin to say. It gets down to the granular level of what is the percentage of agents who participated in a fitness test.
Wow. All of these things. So you're director of and that would be, I guess, set by individual agencies. So the FBI obviously is a federal organization, but say, for example, in Daytona, what's the jurisdiction? Is there a person over that particular jurisdiction, and then is there a person over Florida? How does that work?
Well, Florida actually has 3 separate divisions. The Jacksonville office controls the northern and the panhandle area, and they can't deploy agents from Jacksonville to the west side of the state. So they have what are called resident agencies, and they're satellites. So in Daytona Beach, that's the southernmost on the eastern seaboard office for the Jacksonville field office.
So one other thing before we move on to some of these other specifics, because this whole bonus issue is very disturbing how it works. Lots of different metrics, you check them off. But if you already met your bonus for arrest or indictments in a particular fiscal year, and you don't need any more because you already met your metric that you're shooting for, you can hold off that arrest or indictment or anything else until that fiscal year ends. And then as soon as the next fiscal year begins, you can arrest or indict or use the tool or whatever it might be so that you can then start adding to your next fiscal year's list of these quotas.
Yes, and I think that would be something that would be very interesting for an analysis to be done to see how many arrests happen within the first few weeks of October when the new fiscal year arrives.
So with regards to the January 6th issue, you had been in the FBI for 7 years or so, and then you get assigned to the January 6th. You were on originally the child pornography and human trafficking division there in Daytona area, and you got moved from that, and you have personal knowledge of it, despite what Christopher Wray has said, that they didn't move agents from those investigations to January 6th. You're an example of one that actually experienced that. So now you get moved over to January 6th. One of the things you've said in the past is that typically there would be one file open for January 6th, and that would be run out of Washington, D.C., where the issue happened. But in this case, thousands of files are opened all over the country, including Daytona, which means now all of a sudden you have thousands of opportunities for what? What we were just talking about, quotas.
Yes, it allowed all the 56 field offices to bump their numbers, especially on domestic terrorism, which the supply of in this country is very low. The demand vastly outstrips it from our political elite.
So one of the things that you've mentioned is that there's been a lot of abuse, and what led to your coming forth as a whistleblower was, for example, with a January 6th investigation, one person had been visited by the FBI 18 months before, said the person will cooperate, and now 18 months later, the FBI wants to bring SWAT in and arrest this person, even though there's a pledge of cooperation and there's no break in that pledge, as I understand it. And you bring that plus other irregularities to your supervisor, and then you get put on suspension.
Exactly. I was briefed up the chain of command to multiple levels, and at every level they pushed back and said, you have an exemplary work performance. What you're doing is jeopardizing your career. Unfortunately, what we've come to find out from another whistleblower is that mandate came out from the deputy director, that anybody questioning what is happening with January 6th should be identified and targeted for retribution.
That comes out from the highest levels of the FBI in Washington, D.C.
Yes.
Anybody who's an agent like yourself who questions this protocol, what you're doing, this irregularity, those individuals need to be targeted and investigated?
Yes, and they need to look for employment elsewhere. And here's the thing about whistleblowing. You don't have to be right. You just have to be reasonable. And I think I've articulated a reasonable concern of waste, fraud, abuse, risk to the public safety, and that's in keeping with the Whistleblower Protection Act.
Now, different people in the FBI, now that you've become a whistleblower and you've testified before this select subcommittee in Washington, D.C., in the U.S. House, they've called you different kinds of names. They tried to discredit you. They tried to reveal your medical records. They released those to a major media source. Have they ever said that you're wrong? Have they ever denied what you said?
Nope. They've called me a grifter, conspiracy theorist, political partisan, but never said I was wrong.
So let's move from January 6th to Governor Whitmer's investigation. Tell us about that.
Well, I was called in on the tactical portion, the arrest operations for these subjects at the very tail end, and this was on October of 2020. Traveled to assist in a SWAT capacity.
So even though you're in Daytona, now you're called up to that to go to the Governor Whitmer situation.
At the time, I was with the Omaha division.
Okay,
so,
before you moved to Daytona.
Yes, and then we went over to assist with the arrest, and it was unlike any SWAT experience where I had. The briefing we received included video footage of these subjects who were shooting. We were told that they possessed sophisticated training techniques and weapons and equipment, and they had encrypted communication ability, and they were prepared to get into a gunfight with us should they come into contact. So when we went to secure the location that we were assigned to for that day, we, as opposed to securing it and leaving, we were asked to stand by and be prepared for them to essentially assault us.
So for those that don't remember the Governor Whitmer situation, there was this allegation that people, some group of individuals, wanted to kidnap her and do harm to her, do some harm to the governor. And obviously there was their investigation. You were called in, at the time you were in the Omaha division before you moved to Daytona, and you're called up as part of this task force to go up there in another state to execute your mission. As an FBI agent at the time working in SWAT, you're briefed on what to expect. And the briefing that you got is what you're just saying, that these people would shoot you on sight, essentially, and that you needed to be prepared, if you saw them, to take them out.
Yes, you get a 30,000-foot view of the case, not really into the details of it, but they described these individuals as near peer, which was a term that I was unfamiliar with until I saw the video and saw people wearing equipment that we've come to find out was furnished to them by the FBI, getting training that was paid for by the FBI, because there were situations where there was majority
peer would be like
informants.
they are like you.
Correct.
They're at your level of the SWAT.
Yes.
So they're very well trained like you. So this is a head-to-head battle with people that are essentially your peers, but they're not FBI agents.
I always made it my habit to call my wife after a briefing to tell her what my job was. I didn't want to worry her, so I deliberately forgot to call her that day.
So they're telling you these are near peers. These are individuals who got some of the training, apparently, from the FBI. How did that happen?
The FBI positioned informants and undercovers, and this is very by the script for a lot of its domestic terrorism investigations, and found these vulnerable men who were communicating online with objecting to Governor Whitmer's COVID protocols.
Yeah, it was all coming out of COVID because she was one of the draconian lockdown states and was very oppressive.
There were points where the FBI actually drove them to these recon missions. There were meetings where 12 of the 18 people in the room were either FBI employees or informants.
So the FBI is training these people. They're embedding themselves into a group of people, and they're giving them kind of training and information and even resources to be able to carry out a mission that they then bring in SWAT to try to take them out.
They create the plot so that they can avert the plot and justify their existence. It's a self-licking ice cream cone.
Why would they do something like that?
This is something that they've been doing for decades, and
this is not unusual.
No, and this is what folks on the left have been yelling about. This was the homegrown violent extremism. That was the vulnerable Muslim American who was entrapped. And you look to the Liberty City 7, which happened in southern Florida in 2006. That's still the largest al-Qaeda takedown in the history of the FBI, except none of the subjects were actually a part of al-Qaeda.
Is that right? So that was all a ruse?
Yes.
So how long has this been going on within the FBI?
I've contended that it's always happened. It's just sort of ballooned out of control since September 11th, when the national security responsibilities were beefed up. But you can make the case the FBI has always been about preserving status quo. They went after Martin Luther King.
They went after, well, there's no question about that. You go back and you look at the founder, J. Edgar Hoover, and he was very much opposed to Martin Luther King Jr. And he used the agency, and I think it's fairly clear now with the evidence and information, colluding with others to take Martin Luther King Jr. out.
Yes, it's preserved the status quo.
And others. I mean, they not only him, but they did other civil rights activists too, like raiding one of them in Chicago, drugging them, and coming in and killing them. Yeah. Somebody who was not a threat, may not have been the kind of a person you want to invite home for dinner, but not a threat to the level that J. Edgar Hoover's FBI ultimately did against him to murder an innocent man.
And the perceived political enemy now, who is the target of all these FBI cases, are being described as domestic violent extremists. Now, President Biden has described white supremacy and anti-government extremism as being the two issues that they want to address. Those are the top two priorities of the FBI, counterterrorism, and those are how the president himself has characterized Republican voters.
So how much influence does, say, the person in the White House have on the FBI? And that may be a difficult question to answer, and it depends upon who's in the White House versus who's in the FBI.
I think the FBI has sort of been almost extra constitutional. It's the cult of the director exists, and obviously the director wants to ensure funding for his agency, and he aims to please. But there's been all these guardrails set up, and post September 11th, when the national security apparatus was beefed up, the FBI has now fully evolved from law enforcement into intelligence collection, and the nature of intelligence collection is you target your citizens as opportunities for investigation.
So you've seen a change between before and after September 11 in terms of the morphing of the FBI. It's always had this in its DNA, going back to J. Edgar Hoover, what we just talked about. But it has morphed more from just a law enforcement to also an intelligence gathering institution.
There's no question that it is very much like the robot vacuum that's just always sucking in information about American citizens. And that in itself is deemed successful. Gaining of intelligence for an intelligence investigation is checking the box.
So going back briefly to Governor Whitmer, you're briefed about these individuals. These are near peers, but you find out later on that they were actually infiltrated by the FBI, trained by the FBI, equipped by the FBI, and now you're getting information that may or may not be in the end accurate, but it's a very fearful presentation, so that now instead of just securing the area, you're told to stand there, and if these people come, they're going to take you out. So your natural instinct, not knowing anything else at the time, is you've got to protect yourself and others and take them out. So essentially it is creating a warfare right there to take out otherwise might be innocent people.
Yes, it definitely was more amped up. The environment in the briefing room was unlike any. It's normally pretty jovial, low-key. The room was dead silent. There was no joking. Everybody was very serious and buttoned up because we perceived this to be a legitimate actor who was prepared to fight us on an equal playing field.
In retrospect, was it?
No, it wasn't. And that sort of was the once shame on you, twice shame on me. The Venn diagram that overlapped from the Gretchen Whitmer case to the January 6th case I saw was nearly a complete circle.
So now we get to the January 6th case, and you get some of that same misinformation as well?
Yes, and definitely again, targeting individuals. And we're going to expand the dragnet as wide as we can, as they did with the Whitmer case. Even down to the leadership. Stephen D'Antuono was a special agent in charge of Detroit during the Whitmer case. He was moved over to Washington field office and was special agent in charge for January 6th. So
then the January 6th gets connected to the school board meetings where during COVID or post-COVID, in the midst of COVID, where moms start going to the school boards and they protest the masking, the social distancing, the virtual, and then they also start to find out what's going on in the curriculum, and they start opposing some of this pornographic information in the curriculum. And they're just normal citizens. They're moms that are not activists. They're not violent, but they go there and they raise concerns. Now all of a sudden they get investigated by the FBI. How does that happen?
It happens when the intelligence agency is calling the shots, and they're not using the nimbleness of a cognitive ability where they can look at people doing protected First Amendment activity, and instead they're identifying opportunities for investigation.
And does that come down from the top as well, like the school board investigations?
Yes. I mean, this certainly wasn't a decision that I made from an investigator standpoint on those cases. It was even something that I joked about because I went to school board meetings as a parent, and my colleagues teased me. They said, I guess we're going to have to investigate you.
So you were told to go, because you were one of the FBI agents at the time in the Daytona area that was told to go observe what was happening within a local school board meeting.
Yes. We surveilled a subject of a January 6th case as he went to the meeting, and it was clear to me in retrospect that there was an attempt to marry the January 6th insurrection narrative to the parents being disruptive at school board meetings.
So now you raise the issue of concern about the irregularities because you've got 7 years or so already experience within the FBI in 2 different locations, Omaha and now Daytona. And the January 6th comes up, and the protocol is completely changed in terms of how they deal with people. We already talked about one where they come to arrest somebody who already has said 18 months before they're going to cooperate. You then raise this to your superior, and within 30 days, you are suspended. What happens now?
Once you're placed in suspension, you're unpaid, but you're still technically an FBI employee. So at that point was when the FBI gave my medical information to the New York Times and told them I was under investigation for shooting a firearm improperly. They issued a gag order.
So they gave your medical information that's otherwise protected to a newspaper?
Correct.
To try to discredit you?
Yes, they did it during the hurricane when I was out of contact because of the down cellular reception. Unfortunately, my attorneys pushed back and said that's private information, probably shouldn't be shared in the newspaper of record. They also withheld my training documents. They attempted a gag order that said I was precluded from talking about this, even with my wife or an attorney. And when I requested to have outside employment, they denied me that, and within 1 day.
What does the typical FBI agent who is a whistleblower do in your situation? They have no choice but to resign.
They have no choice but to resign, and then any sort of information they brought forward is just swept away as the ramblings of an angry ex-employee, and it's never addressed.
So when you wrote this book, True Blue, you sent them a copy. You said, this is what I'm going to be publishing. And they asked you, what's it about? And you said, it's in the book, read it. And they came back with a PDF of your book. It was a galley copy at the time, apparently. And they just completely blacked out, what, 40 pages or so?
They blacked
the entire page.
They blacked out all the information I brought forward about whistleblowing, which is all public record.
It's all public record.
They blacked out the Whitmer information, which, again, that case had already been adjudicated. And then finally, there's a transcript of a 2-hour meeting that I had with my senior executives where they tried to compel me to violate my oath of office. And they were unhappy with that because it exposed senior executives in the FBI for violating their own oath.
So even before you get to whistleblowing, if you don't toe the line and you don't make these quotas, how does somebody advance within the FBI?
You have to be a yes man. You have to never say no to a bad idea. And you have to start that process very early in your career. Most senior executives ascend the management ladder about 6 years into the bureau career. So very inexperienced as investigators. Invent a solution and find a problem to apply it to.
So by the time you get to a level, say, of a Christopher Wray or somebody that's a deputy director of the FBI or a high-level administrator of the FBI, you've already been basically like Pavlovian's dog. You've been trained to do whatever you're told and accept whatever bad idea. And now if you are a political appointee, you may have a certain ideology as well that you use within the FBI. It becomes a very dangerous weaponization of what was a law enforcement agency that's now an intelligence gathering agency focused now, unfortunately, looking at our own people, the people of the United States of America, as potential terrorists.
Yes, and I think when you harken back to that radical traditional Catholic memo, the most disturbing portion of it was the word opportunity, because the FBI was looking for parishioners as an opportunity to recruit them to become informants for the FBI.
Well, Steve, how do people respond to this? What is their hope to reform this, and what do people do? How do we go forward from here?
The best thing you can do is look to your local law enforcement. Your sheriff, who you elect every 2-4 years, can stand in the gap. The doctrine of the lesser magistrate is real. The FBI cannot do its job without participation of local partners. So if you knock on your sheriff's door and say, I'm unhappy with what's going on, bring him up to speed on some of the information that I've brought out, a good sheriff is going to pull his people back. And as was the case in Daytona, that's 4 counties, 1 million citizens, 8 special agents. It's impossible to police without the participation of your local deputies.
People really underestimate the power of a local sheriff. The head of the sheriff, the elected official, has a lot of local law enforcement capability. So that's great advice. Also, we need to reform within the FBI agency itself. It's been a problem from the very beginning, but it's gotten worse since September 11th. This book, 40 pages in here, the FBI don't want you to read, but it's here, and you can read it, True Blue. You can get it on Amazon, or you can go to your social media at Real Steve Friend, at Real Steve Friend. Steve, thank you for joining us, and thank you for your courage.
Thank you. God bless.
It's unbelievable what's happening within this FBI. And it's unbelievable that somebody that loves to have law and protect people and loves law in order to make sure that people are safe, like Steve in this case, raises the concern, and that individual voice gets silenced, and he had to put it all on the line. I'm so glad that he did, that he's not like so many others that are fearful for their career and just looking to the next paycheck and are silent about what they're seeing happening within this or other agencies. He came forth and he's put it all on the line, and he wrote the book True Blue. As a result of just raising the concern, he was suspended, as you heard, and that suspension essentially has a dead-end street. You're going to have to resign if you want to even pay the bills after that. And these people are being pushed out. What's even more concerning are the fact that there's about 700 people that he knows of that are under investigation within the FBI, and it's likely that these people also could probably be cross-referenced as individuals who gave a request for a religious accommodation from the COVID shot. And what's even also disturbing is his story regarding Governor Gretchen Whitmer, where they were briefed with perhaps wrong information. They were literally set up to be in a situation where they would take these people out, perhaps wrongly so, and that the FBI actually coordinated all of this at the very beginning. They created a problem, and then they sent SWAT teams in there, and perhaps even some people were hoping that the SWAT teams would take out all these individuals so there would be no eyewitnesses and no court hearings. Obviously, this abuse needs to come to an end. We need to make sure that our elected officials know and that this agency is reformed, but also make sure that you know who your elected sheriff is. As Steve said, this is a major issue in every locale. Well, in closing, remember Galatians 5, verse 1, which says, "It was for freedom that Christ set us free. Therefore, keep standing firm and do not be subject again to a yoke of slavery." Our freedom is a gift from our Creator. We must never forget that and always protect it. So join us again here next time, where you will hear victories as well as ways you can stand up for your priceless freedom. Join us again for Freedom Alive.